it's preparing to live stream.
I have a note that says it's now streaming live on YouTube, if that makes you happy, and I see that it's recording.
Awesome, we're live on YouTube. And can you see my screen all right?
Yes.
Great,
I see it too.
awesome. You know, we can start admitting everyone now since it's close to 9. Alex.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll start.
Hey, good morning, everyone. We're just waiting for some people to join right now. This is the Property Tax Working Group meeting, the focus recommendation group on residential tax abatement policy. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube right now. While we wait for everyone to arrive, if I could just ask you to remain on mute. And if you have any technical questions or you can't hear me, you can use the chat bar to reach out to staff. Okay, good morning. I think we have the majority of people who signed up for this meeting, so welcome. This is the Property Tax Working Group Focused Recommendation Group on Residential Tax Abatement Policy. The Focused Recommendation Group is a subcommittee of the Property Tax Working Group. This meeting is being recorded and is being live streamed on YouTube as we speak. My name is Samantha McLean and I'm with the Department of City Planning. I'll be helping to facilitate the logistics of today's meeting. And I'd just like to run by a quick agenda and some virtual meeting housekeeping before asking the co-chairs of the group to introduce themselves. So for today's meeting agenda, we'll go through some virtual meeting housekeeping. We'll hear from the co-chairs of the Property Tax Working Group, Vice Mayor Christopher Smitherman and Carol Gibbs. I'll introduce the working group members who are on the call today. We'll go over quickly the purpose of the Property Tax Working Group since it's been a while since we last met and there might be new people on the call. We'll talk about the goals of today's meeting. This is really a working meeting, refining recommendations for this subcommittee. We'll work on those recommendations and then we'll talk about some next steps. So as I mentioned, this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. Everything in this meeting, including anything in the chat bar, is public record, and that includes any individual messages sent between any attendees. So just keep that in mind. We ask that everyone remain muted throughout the meeting unless you're speaking. Working group members throughout the conversation, feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions just as you would during a in-person Property Tax Working Group meeting. Members of the public, any community members who have attended the meetings in the past, you're familiar with the comment cards. So in an in-person meeting, you would fill out a physical comment card that would be given to the co-chairs to include in the conversation. Since we can't do in-person comment cards, we're asking that you use the chat bar feature, which you can find at the bottom of your screen, to ask any questions or comments, submit comments. Since the meeting is being recorded, we will have a log of all those comments and questions if we don't get to them in this meeting. I will pause at various points throughout the meeting to check with the chat bar moderator so that they can read the questions out loud for the working group. If possible, when you're submitting a question or a comment, just to help organize things, if it's in relation to a specific recommendation, we ask that you try to note that recommendation number, or at least try to give some context to your question so we don't get confused. Okay, and with that, I'm going to pass it over to Vice Mayor Christopher Smitherman and Carol Gibbs to just give some welcoming remarks.
Vice Mayor, Co-Chair, would you like to start?
Sure. Just thank everybody for being here. I want to thank the planning department for all of their hard work. Samantha, you continue to do a great job. You know, we had 1,700 of our city workers furloughed. Again, I can't say enough for the planning department kind of keeping everything together and in hold as we kind of move through this. You know, today is a very important meeting because the objective is to really put some pen to paper from my perspective so that we can move legislation forward on the floor of council. My timeline for that is to submit something to be referred to my committee in August so that there's public discussion about the legislation, but not hold a vote in August, giving citizens an opportunity to digest the recommendations coming from the committee, and then having another discussion in September when we're coming completely out of full recess. We have one meeting in August, another meeting in September, and at that time have a full vote and referring the legislation to a Wednesday meeting for a vote. So that's kind of my timeline. And I just, again, thank you all for taking your time today and for the last over a year to pull this work together. Thanks, Samantha. Co-chair.
It was beautifully said. And I want to thank you for co-chairing it with me. This has been fun. And I hope we get some meaningful changes to policies, both at the local level and the state level. And by the way, Samantha, it's asking a lot for me to not speak.
I should clarify, the working group, even though this is a virtual meeting, working group members, feel free to unmute yourself at any time. We just ask that you say unmuted unless you're speaking, just to help with some of the noise, background noise. So Carol, unmute yourself whenever you wish. So with that, thank you to the co-chairs. I just wanted, since it's been a while, we might have some new people on the call today. I just wanted to briefly touch on the working group and kind of the purpose behind it. So this working group really emerged, from a conversation between the co-chairs, Carol bringing a concern to the vice mayor about seniors and people living with disabilities not being able to remain in their homes because of rising property taxes. And then from that conversation led to a motion that was brought to council by Vice Mayor Smitherman and approved in fall of 2018. That formed the working group. And since then, this timeline is also on our website, so don't feel like you have to read everything right now. But since then, there have been 12 regularly scheduled meetings. So the first meetings really focused on setting expectations. The bulk of those middle meetings was really kind of education and building kind of a foundation of knowledge for the working group on these issues. And then last fall in November and December, the property tax working group split into 3 subcommittees. So this is one of them. So the first one was focused on property tax relief for seniors and people living with disabilities and special needs. The second group focused on resources for low and limited income residents. And then this group is focused on residential tax movement policy recommendations. Those other groups have been meeting and will continue to meet to finalize their recommendations, but today is specifically focused on the residential tax abatement policy. In addition to the regularly scheduled property tax working group meetings, there have been 3 meetings specifically open to the public to hear from them directly. And then we have had a couple surveys with over 650 responses from community members, which really helped to inform the working group's work. So most recently, the draft recommendations were presented in a meeting in January 30th. It was a public meeting to get some feedback. In February, the subcommittees worked on incorporating that feedback, and we're still in the progress of that when COVID-19 kind of altered our plan. So this group hasn't met since February, but now, as the Vice Mayor and Carol said, we're really getting back into the swing of things so we can finalize these recommendations. With that, the goals of the meeting today are, this meeting is from 9 to 11 a.m. The goals are to recap the draft recommendations for anyone who might have forgotten or might not have seen them, to discuss the proposed recommendation changes and an additional recommendation, and to review and finalize recommendation if time allows. If we don't get to that third point, there is another meeting scheduled on Monday, July 13th. And since this is a virtual meeting, I did want to talk about next steps now in case anyone has to log off early. We will recap this at the end though. There is a meeting planned for Monday, July 13th to finish the work of today if that's needed. If not, we will let you know. And then there is a property tax working group meeting scheduled for July 23rd from 9 to 11 a.m. on the final recommendations and report from the group. That meeting right now is proposed to be a hybrid meeting, so virtual options and in-person attendance options, and we will have more information on our website, and we will email it out to anyone that's on our email list. You can always visit the website for more information or to get connected to me to be added to our email list. Before we get into the recommendations, I just want to check with the working group. Do you have any questions at this moment? And then I realized I did not even introduce the working group, so I'm going to do that real quick. On the call, we have, in addition to the Vice Mayor and Carol Gibbs, the co-chairs, we have Chris Offrey from the University of Cincinnati School of Planning, Elizabeth Bartley from Invest in Neighborhoods, Eve Bolton from the CPS School Board. We should have Mark Lawson from the Community Action Agency, Mark Corey from the Cincinnati Area Board of Realtors, Mike Wagner from Cincinnati Neighborhood Business Districts United, Paul Yankee from Green Building Consulting, and Sharon Watkins from the Community Action Agency. Did I miss any working group members who are on the call? If so, please unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Yes, this is Brian Spiller. I'm on the Mount Lookout Community Council.
Okay, thanks, Brian. So in addition, there are working group members who are appointed by that motion of City Council. And in addition to the working group members, I know we have quite a few community members on the call. And thank you for calling. I believe we have over 15 people. So thanks for attending. If at any point you do have questions or comments, please use the chat bar so that we can make sure everyone's question is being recorded, and we will ask our chat bar moderator to share those questions as they come up. So in addition to working group members, we do have quite a few members of city staff that I just want to acknowledge. We have Caitlin Geiger and Erica Faubourg from the city's law department, and then Dan Bauer from the Department of Community and Economic Development, who has been working with Carol on this focused recommendation group. We also have Stacy Hoffman and Alex Peppers from the Department of City Planning. Stacy will be taking notes for us, and Alex will be monitoring that chat bar and responding to any tech issues that might come up. Alex, at this point, are there any questions or comments in the chat bar?
I do not see any right now.
Okay, great. We'll continue to monitor that, but we will move on to looking at the draft recommendations. So we'll first recap the draft recommendations as they are now. And I am going to turn it over to Carol and Dan to provide a recap. Please let me know when to advance to the next slide.
Go for it, Dan.
So kind of you, Carol. So the group, through the numerous meetings that we've had, outlined its many goals for what modifications to the residential tax abatement policy could look like. So if you want to start progressing the slide, Samantha. The policy should, one big thing that came up was not reducing existing property tax value from the rolls. That was one thing that came up over and over again. So whether it was the application process itself or the coordination with the auditor, that the policy should ensure that that is occurring. And that the policy itself should be reviewed every 3 to 5 years to ensure that there was not an adverse impact from the abatement program in specific neighborhoods. You can keep going forward. Recommendations included a tiered system, similar to, I think Columbus is the other city in the state of Ohio who has that. And then recommendation 3 was, kind of a similar thing of not a blanket wide policy, but neighborhoods seeking abatements for both new construction and renovation. You can keep going. 4 and 5 had to do with ensuring that there's not an impact of the program on affordable housing unless it's positive. And then going down there, family units kind of was a similar thing. So there were a lot of, and this is kind of where we're going from here, is there were a lot of desires in the goals. And I think Carol would concur, it was not easy to take all of those and give you this is the answer. So I think what we're putting before you is the best attempt at navigating to achieve the most goals possible. So family units was another goal. And then obviously encouraging low cost of homeownership, because obviously even though homeownership is a desire, any of you who are a homeowner know the joys of homeownership and how much money you have to continually put into your house. Definitely not speaking from personal experience there. And then transparency on residential abatements, like where does the money go at roll off, whether that's I know the auditor, since we started this initiative, the auditor started putting the data on his website, but this might also include, the city's portal for abatements. And then 10 and 11 kind of consider, whether it's the local environment that abatements play within, but also, the decision of persons to invest, whether it's in the city or in another jurisdiction based on the incentives and the tax rates. And then 12 was encouraging, another goal of the city, small minority, women-owned businesses and smaller scale developments. 13 was historic conservation, which is typically in the abatement program under the renovation side versus the new construction side. 14, obviously this was pre-COVID, but if the, program required more staffing, that more staffing would be given. And then 15, and this is where the vice mayor mentioned earlier, that there be adequate notice about a policy change to the public so the folks could weigh in. And there's also some consideration for, when the policy change would take effect. Okay. And okay, so Samantha, do we have on here the existing policy? Because I think that's helpful. There you go. Okay, so this is the existing policy. If you go to the council ordinance, and if I'm just going to go off the top of my head, I think it's 275 2017. It's either 275 2017 or 276 2017. That's the matrix that anyone working in the city now has to kind of go to determine what abatement they can get. So I believe, if I'm counting the rows, there's 15 different options that you can choose from. I'll tell you, as the department that administers this program, there are some options that just aren't chosen. And I think this is a conversation that we've had throughout. But, this is one thing we were trying to, we heard from you, was there are certain policy goals that the working group wanted to make sure that even in changing the policy goals themselves continue to be achieved. So whether that was, the green building or the visitable construction, or encouraging renovations, that when you move to a new program of some sort, that those policy goals are things that continue to show up in the new program. All right, so then if you want to go to the proposal, Samantha. So in kind of talking about, so I'll address, I think the first thing everyone's going to want to know is the tiers versus citywide policy. So in kicking around the tiers idea, and I'll say, at least from the administration has not, formally weighed in on this. We've just been providing kind of a advisory role to the committee and trying to help the committee put together, the policy that the committee is going to recommend. But the reason for that, you do not see tiers, is one of the conversations from the working group is the desire for an immediate change to the policy that could take place now. For anyone who is familiar with Columbus's change, their path to tiers took over 2 years, and just the way Columbus is already structured, they already had different CRAs that did function under, slightly different rules. So one neighborhood getting different benefits from another neighborhood was not foreign to Columbus when they undertook that path. They also paid for 2 third-party consultants to do the analysis and the studying that then resulted in their program. I don't know the total cost, but I want to say it was $200,000 or more. So it was just the competing goals of get something done now versus do a tiered system. That is why you do not see a tiered system, because it's the concern for the time to do a study, the money to do a study. I suppose the differing views among our neighborhoods on whether they might want that in the immediate future. But when choosing between time or tiers, obviously timing was something we heard more from a number of the stakeholders of wanting to make changes effective immediately. So that's what you see in front of you. It's a much simpler metric than what governed the policy previously. A couple of things to highlight, that's just trying to repeat back to the group things that were heard. Renovation is obviously far more valued in this proposal, just as structured, whether it's on the years or on the amount of the abatement that it can receive. Green building is still, the higher value than just a regular renovation or regular new construction. And then something that was really emphasized was visitable construction, and this kind of overlapped with 1 or 2 of the other subcommittees. But it's the current program visitability. No one chooses to go that path because the current structure doesn't really provide an additional incentive to do it that offsets the cost to build visitable. And so in proposing an additional cap for visitable construction, that was a way to, try to accomplish that policy goal, which hadn't really been realized under the prior abatement program. So that's kind of big picture. Obviously, there's nothing, you won't see anything on here about MBEWB. You won't see anything on here on some of the other goals, because it was difficult to fit all of the goals that were listed. I want to say there was 15 or 16 of them into a matrix that persons could understand easily. So I think with that, Carol, I want to kick it over to you. I mean, this is obviously something that you have very passionate feelings about. And I'm going to let you finish it off.
So the one thing I wanted to mention too, in the community review every 3 to 5 years, looking at these we did incorporate a suggestion to have community members involved in that review. The other recommendation that I really want to see happen is to take the residential buildings from a maximum of 3 to 4 families. We have many 4 families that sit vacant in our city. And I think that that might be a quick ability to have some lower income, some affordable housing for families, not only just perhaps first-time homeownership, a lower income, lower rental cost, and the formation of some community assistance, some support. I know that I was reminded that the school board would probably not like this idea. And I'm not suggesting we go over 4, even though I know that there are folks out there that would like to take this even further. That's what I would like to see. I would like to see these buildings that are for families become residential renovation and not commercial renovation.
So Dan and Carol, thank you for explaining kind of those changes and additional recommendations. I think at this point, that was a lot of information. So working group members, if you have any questions at this time or comments, please share them.
I just want to add as the co-chair that one of the steps that the co-chair and I, Dan, and I believe Samantha, you were there. We met with the mayor. I just can't remember. It was so long ago, so I apologize. But we ran this proposal, which I thought, I mentioned that at our last meeting that I was going to do that. We did have that meeting prior to COVID-19, and the mayor is aware of this part of our recommendation, and generally was very, very supportive of them. So I think we're on the right track. Thank you.
Any other working group members have a question? If not, I'm going to ask Alex Peppers to read any comments or questions from the chat bar.
Samantha?
Yes.
This is Paul, yeah. Yes, definitely have a couple thoughts. So thank you, Vice Mayor and Carol, for posting up an item. And I want to say this is from the HBA, USGBC, and me personally. I'll agree 100% with the weight toward a potential citywide proposal change now to get something going, and I think get some action, which people have asked for, and instead of the wait. If time was going to be the issue, because you're exactly right. That's a good assessment, because I watched the Columbus one happen, and that took a long time to do on that piece. So I think that's great. Again, just seeing this last night and kind of, we'd already been putting together potential items maybe for the tiered piece, or we had some of this built, but I've got a couple ideas and thoughts on these. So number one is I always appreciate the simplicity part, dropping it down some. Keep in mind, we actually have the simplest one of anyone else in Ohio right now. The other ones are way more complex. So, but the tiers and the setups, I started running some numbers early. And again, I've only had a few hours to kind of work with this, but running some of the numbers quickly on where some of this would fall in, I've got a couple recommendations. One, I like where this was going. I see where we've taken the kind of the unlimited right off the top, which that had been a concern. I think I've mentioned this before. There will be, if we take that off, there is some loss of income and benefit to the city and things like that for houses that just won't do the extra. And it's the most painful extra, and it's the biggest amount they have to overinvest. A $2 million house has to put in $200,000 to $500,000 extra to get to LEED Platinum. That won't happen. So that money will not get invested in the city if we take this off. That's okay. There's not that many of those. All right. So there's, you know, if there's 10 of those a year, we lose a couple $1 million of investment. So without that, I think the tiers of the dollar amounts where you're at, my first number one is the visitability piece, put an additional cap. Thank you. That is one of my, I talked to previous council member Flynn when we kind of originally put this in, and it was a shame that there was not enough of a gap to make that powerful before. So finding a way to make that powerful and incentivize, this would do it. I would say, I would recommend the $100,000 cap being on any of these amounts, but maybe not the 5 years. And there's a reason for that. What we don't want to do, and this is what Councilmember Flynn actually was worried about in the past when you originally proposed this, was competing. So choosing one over another, when right now we need visitability in lead houses just as much as we do any other house, and they're not choosing that. So I definitely want the ability to have both. And if it goes to the 15-year, which is the one thing that usually we're kind of using again in the green tiers, there'll be a choice in a lot of buildings. And I don't think we want that. We want to get it everywhere we can. The good news is, if you put this $100,000 additional cap with no extra years, I can tell you with a lot of certainty that just about any house over, let's say it's the 750 or wherever that tier comes in, you will get a very large percentage of those houses being built with the visibility pieces. I can assure you of that. Like, based on the dollar amount that would be associated with that, you will get what you wanted. So that's a big deal. Number two, the new construction piece. This might be the time to do it, and I'm a strong proponent of, I don't know that we need to incentivize the new construction without something extra. So the proposal that we would have is that new construction, the 200,000 10-year would go away. There's not a reason right now. Close to 90% of all new construction is happening already with LEED. The only ones that aren't are ones that are in neighborhoods, you know, of lower priced new construction homes that are claiming they can't afford it. And that's unfortunate. So now you're having the individuals of greatest need and the markets of greatest need having the lowest quality housing. That is one of the trends that I've been worried about, and it's happening, and there's no reason for it. The cost to do LEED and those type of higher performance things are lower for those type of houses. And we have some math and some supporting docs that'll show that the added cost in the mortgage actually can be offset by the savings. So it's really just a push of extra cost back to the homeowner. The benefit goes to builders or developers, or, you know, to others. And that's really not what we're intending to do. So this would be a good time, the way you're switching this, to end that. That is not going the direction that you'd want. So the proposal that we've got to have, I've got a first tier of it, but it looks closer like, if we were to take that out, I would recommend for any kind of small contractors, this goes back to one of the other recommendations of making sure we support small, minority, women-owned contractors and their abilities, because that helps a lot of local contractors do a lot of work. I suppose we propose at the HBA, this is USGBC, and I'd like to partner with the city on proposing a training program for how to do these. If any contractor, it costs them more than a few $1,000s extra to go that way for a $150,000 or $200,000 house, then they're doing it wrong. They have not gone through that training that usually market companies like us put on for free. And that should be something, quite frankly, the market should have access to, and we can only do so much. So I think that's a big deal, and we can get the training and support these local contractors in the same sense, get lower priced, you know, so better value, affordable housing, entry-level housing in the neighborhoods we need to. So that's combo there. That starts to give us a little more room. And I really like what you guys were doing with the renovation being higher. I do think we need all 3 tiers of the green building tiers. We previously had 4, and Dan, you're right, the certified, well, we have 5. Certified LEED does not need to be there. that can go away. Silver, gold, and platinum are very important. That will drive the cost a certain way. And then the last thing I was going to say is this is something we were working on. It's just about completed. But the HERS tax abatement that was created, I was asked to create by a couple council members and the Office of Environmental Sustainability a couple years ago as a moderate rehab tier that would give some better, higher quality energy efficiency and other items for more moderate rehabs. I was concerned, again, does not have enough gap where it was, just like the visibility, it couldn't create enough of an incentive because it was squeezed in between two levels that weren't wide enough. This will give us the opportunity to do that. So I think my current suggestion that I've got, I would love to see, and again, this would be vetted through DCED to get the final numbers, but I'll post this, but it's new construction at 0. If it's not something additional, renovation to capture all renovations, because remember, you can do a $10,000 renovation on your house and get that abated. That's a good revenue source for the city, right? So that is, remember, you're capturing unpermitted work for Uncle Joe doing the kitchen rehab. So that's a big deal. But you really don't need that higher than about 150,000. So renovation with no bells or whistles attached to it, we could see that going to 150,000 10-year term. But then adding in this renovation, the moderate one, where you then have some sort of either HERS or some performance certificate that's a much lower cost, much easier bar to hit, take that up to 300,000 in 15 years. And that will capture a lot of improvement, especially in the neighborhoods that you want to improve. We are actually piloting this in a couple other cities right now, and it's a huge advantage. Then you would jump new construction, LEED silver, might be at 300,000, 15 years. Renovation, make that upgrade to 400, right? Give it the extra 100,000. I think that always should be renovation higher. I love it, Carol. I think that's awesome. And then gold, you could put at 500,000, renovation at 6. Platinum could be 700, and maybe 800 for renovation. So really right around the same range. You are just tiering it out a little different. I can send this to you if you want, Samantha. Again, I've had a few hours to put the final numbers in, so I think there's some, but this is the framework we were building before that I thought would make a lot of sense if we went this way. You guys added some amazing parts. I love what you did with the visibility and the tier you went with the renovation. So anyway, that's my starting. Oh, on your 4 unit, by the way, Carol, I'm all in. So I think that's a huge advantage. We have a ton of those buildings and they're not getting rehabbed. They're not getting built. Huge deal. I would like to make sure I plug that the even up to like 10 units or so, that market's still having a tough time with the additional cost of the commercial tax abatement program. So if there's a way to get some reduced fees and maybe a little bit streamlined process for maybe buildings up to 10, 15, 20, that would be great. If that's something we can add in as a small, but I kind of agree with you, just putting just the 4 unit might be a long and big enough stretch at this point to put over into the residential. And I don't think that's a big stretch at all, but it's really smart and it matches the construction industry. So anyway, those are my first thoughts there.
Thanks, Paul. And if you send that to me, we'll be sure to include that in the notes.
Mm-hmm.
Carol and Dan and the Vice Mayor, do you have any responses to those statements?
One thing I would like to see is where we've got renovation. I would love to see restoration / renovation. And I'm not real sure why we would insist on those being green. You know, some of these, at least some of the old buildings in Mount Auburn, I'm not sure the cost of making them LEED or green would be outrageous. So I would like to see that that conversation happen again, but I really think renovation is the kitchen being redone. And I think restoration to me is more important and deserves a much higher tier to take an old building and bring it back to life.
No, I'd agree. Yeah. I think for the terms of the city, they probably don't see a big difference in that. So you and I know the difference, right? And that can be partial versus a real restaurant. I would say we can make sure to clarify that, but I think the wording from their end would be the same. As far as the green piece, what we have a concern with is we've seen a lot of restorations and renovations done. They've actually hurt the building more than they've helped. They've done aesthetic and then not taken the time to make a quality. So when we talk about green, LEED is a big stretch. That's why I'm saying this is the time. We've been wanting to add a more moderate piece where they don't just take a building and make it look better, but they do make sure that they put indoor air quality into that building, that they actually put things, so the building can actually hold. One of our bigger issues is they haven't put ventilation into some of the restorations we've seen. And so the buildings are actually deteriorating at a faster rate after the work than they were before. And that's really caused major moisture problems and other things. These are very baseline items, much less expansion than LEED. But there's systems that we've been, that are out there and we have already kind of built for this that would show kind of a point system just in those areas. It gives tons of flexibility. It's lower cost, but they're all common sense things. It's more about keeping the durability and then the healthiness of the building. It also then adds in energy efficiency and water at your pace. So.
And some of that isn't just required in terms of permits and that, that basic restorations.
In renovation, the requirements are much, much lower, right? So code.
But that's why I want to change this to restoration / renovation. And not anybody's going to do a $750,000 renovation. That to me is a restoration of a building that has to have major work done on it.
It's true. And we're having a lot of those done, and those when
Thank
you
goodness.
have a budget, LEED is very easy to do. Not easy, but it's within the same realm now that at new construction, but might have a little bit more work. And that's why the added 100,000 I thought was really a good idea, because it's exactly right. That mathematically matches really where the additional work is. And I think you're going to make that, you're doing exactly what you want. Is oh man, it's a good building, but boy, if I tore it down, I could put 2 or 3 up there. This math, it was a big jump just to get them even, but making them now the other direction, I really do think will have an outsized effect. I think you will push 80 or 90% of those people that thought immediately to tear it down. They won't. They will immediately go do the math instead of just tearing it down. And I really do think you slow that roll quite a bit.
So it seems like, Paul, you're recommending or suggesting, adding a few more tiers and adjusting those caps. Do we have, Carol and Dan, the Vice Mayor working group, do we have concerns about any of those suggestions? Based on conversations that you've had and feedback that you've received?
Well, this is Dan. I think my goal is just whatever the draft recommendation is that comes out of the working group, just to get that to the administration for review as quick as I can. Obviously, we got a city manager changeover, so it's just been a ending furlough and going into a new, city manager positions just kind of put us behind the 8 ball in terms of getting it evaluated. So as soon as we get something official out of this group, I can obviously get it up the chain.
At this point too, I just want to check with Alex, who's monitoring the chat bar. Are there any questions or comments from any community members at this point?
Yeah, so we've got one question from Elizabeth Brown, who says, the proposal seems to be for increased abatements citywide in several categories. Is that correct?
I could take this one. The way it's structured, most of the cities, the way with Paul's so I'll say first what you're looking at. So what you're looking at would pare down abatements related to just base new construction, which is the lion's share of our tax abatements. Even though we talk most about the $1 million homes, most of the abatements that we do involve homes under 275,000. And so this proposal would pull that cap down, almost a third. down $75,000. So, and then it would pull down the LEED Platinum. It would increase renovations, but the value add in a renovation is often less, not always, but often less than new construction because there's already a value to that house. Whereas, the ideal new construction is it's a vacant lot that you're building something on. So then Paul, the proposal that he put out there would further kind of limit abatements as it would require green building for the new construction, which again, that is a very big, currently a big volume that we do that's new construction without LEED. So I think the answer is it's a mixed bag. Just depending on whichever proposal you go with.
And I think before I asked Alex about the chat bar, Eve, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I just want to comment regarding the four family. I don't think there's any doubt that the initial response from the district would be that we would prefer not to lose whatever revenue that might be by moving it from the commercial to the residential. However, I think, frankly, the board feels strongly too about having a housing plan and housing policy that makes more units available to our families. And if we're talking in terms of the four family with the 2-bedroom apartments sort of thing, I think that it's possible that while we would need to see some sort of plan to be excited about that, I think a 4-family piece could be a step forward, at least for the board, even though that might initially or ultimately mean less revenue. So I don't see that it would be necessarily opposed by the board, but rightfully so be opposed by our administration and advising us in particular ways. But I think that that's a good idea to move forward. And my other question was, I don't know if it's in any of these recommendations, and maybe I missed it at the very beginning, but where I know the large committee was emphasizing having targeted neighborhoods. Is there a part of any of these recommendations that talk about the targeting of particular neighborhoods that need the development? And that seemed to be a general view instead of necessarily, is the citywide approach to it? Is that supposed to take care of the targeting?
This is, and I think there was some question of legality in terms of targeting neighborhoods, and I don't know how that came out. What happened with that?
Eve, the conversation was really how long it would take, and having not done tiers locally and wanting to have something that's defensible in court. If a person who is in a neighborhood that we said, doesn't deserve as high a level of abatement, a person could, if we don't build the correct case for why we have chosen certain neighborhoods over others. The concern in rolling something out soon was we would not do the study. We would not have a study. We would not have, the information to kind of base a case upon if we were challenged. So we were it was the value of like hearing from folks, they want something done soon versus, seeing a longer path to the possibility of doing tiers.
And I understand that. I'm just saying that at almost every one of the meetings, the idea of using this opportunity to help development in particular neighborhoods was a general theme. So from a political standpoint and a sales point, that would be something that people will look immediately for, the general population. So I just think that I wouldn't drop it necessarily completely.
Can I weigh in a minute, Samantha, or Vice Mayor and Carol? This is Chris Offrey. As I think Eve's just pointed out, there's much of this is based on our intuition and sense of how to move things along expeditiously and get something in place, actually get something done. But it's not built on facts, and I mean, we can't afford a in-depth $200,000 study that would take 2 years and put all those things in place. And maybe we can build into any legislation, any ordinance that might come out of this, is a revisit that does look at different neighborhoods and attempt to tier it and give us some additional time, and whether it's done internally or externally, try to build a factual basis for the impact of some of these other policies. I don't want the best to be the enemy of the good, or whatever the expression is here, because we do need to seize the day and move forward. But at the same time, it doesn't seem to be built on hard numbers.
So in response to that, if I could just add kind of some perspective from
Sure.
a couple of the other subcommittees. So some of the other subcommittees have been looking at their recommendations and prioritizing them based on, urgency, and then how, how the short term versus long term, how difficult it would be to implement, what resources would be needed to implement them. So maybe an approach, to that is for this group to have, here's the recommendation that we're putting forth right now. And then here are some other more, in the future, in the long term, we would want to revisit this. I don't know, Carol and Dan or Eve.
If I could add to that, since we last met, of course, we've had COVID, but also since we last met, the nation is having a reckoning as well with one another. And it would seem to me to be a missed point if somehow we're not talking in terms of finding ways to encourage, and I think some of this does, individual smaller developers, so to speak, or residents. But again, maybe somewhere in this needs to be the reference regarding minority contractors, women-owned companies. I just think we're missing. And it's hard for me to think that you have to have too many more studies to figure out what neighborhoods need some development. But if that's the way, I know that's the way the school district works too, and the city's even worse about that. So I just really think to capture the imagination of people and to capture what was said in these meetings, and to also ride the bull, if you will, of the energy in the country and the city right now. There has to be some sort of nod to that energy and to those kinds of commitments, I think.
School Board Member Dalton. This is Vice Mayor Smitherman. Thank you for the your comments around 4 families. And I think some of that will happen with that change in policy. There are a lot of smaller investors who have wanted to be attracted to those specific projects. And I think it marries very well with your comments about trying to provide better housing for more people. And so, if the school board, if we can get them there where they can be supportive around that particular item without even identifying race. And I just go back on my own dad, who owned 4 families. I mean, middle-class families tend not to go, big. It's too much risk. But they do play quite a bit in 4 families. So I just want to say that. And it's not that I disagree at all with your final comment. I think that 4 family piece is important in kind of changing the landscape of investors putting their money to work.
And home ownership. It really could be a first-time home ownership where you have 3 apartments that bring in extra income, and we just have to make sure that homeowner knows how to take care of that building and what to do and how to be a landlord. But I think it's a great step of getting families out of poverty too.
And if I could add, I appreciate the comments. I believe the board would be able to say about the 4-family, but I think anything larger than that, moving it to residential might be counterproductive, and the financial people within the district and board would take hold of that instead of be focused on providing a wonderful housing for our families. So I think there is a 4-family limit to probably being acceptable. But certainly, I think that would be great. And no matter where we look, this town has plenty of 4-families and buildings, and boy, that'd be a great boom, I think, for a lot of neighborhoods.
Thank you so much, new board member. And I think you're right on point. And I don't have any desire to go greater than 4 families personally. So I think it's the sweet spot. And I think this is anecdotally, but I see a lot of 4 families sitting vacant or needing attention. And I think that this is going to be that incentive to have people put capital to work in those spaces. So again, thank you very much for that, because I know that that is a compromise, and we always can come back and change this. You know, if things get too hot, if things don't go the way we think they're going to go, you know, we always can come back and change it.
So I am hearing that there are a couple questions or comments in the chat bar. Alex, if you wouldn't mind reading one at a time, please.
Sure, and I'll just read them in the order that they're coming in. So the second question is from Brian Spittler, and he said, Paul mentioned new construction. Could he please recap his recommendations on this subject?
Sure. And it again, preliminary draft, I think I sent to you, Samantha, and I think Dan. So yeah, the theory for, I guess, new construction, the entry level piece is that right now, and I'd like to, you know, DCD and I can talk about what those numbers are. From what we've seen, the construction side, non-lead, anything right now of $300,000 or more is virtually zero, from what we know. And anything that is not doing it, it's under that amount. So it's starter homes, it's in neighborhoods that are, you know, can support 150,000 to $300,000 houses. But you have, and we bring this up all the time, I mean, Working in Neighborhoods is a great example that builds $150,000 LEED platinum houses. And they do it for under the market value. Now they have support too, but I'm talking the actual cost is 150 to 200 tops. So it can be done, but it's training. So the contractors, a lot of times that are building those homes don't have that training on how to do it affordably. And you have way better outcomes for those individuals, and you're just transferring costs. So there's just not a value, and there hasn't been for a little while, but it's been just one we've had for a while. It's the new construction incentive, non-anything, right? Non-visitable, non-lead. So giving something better than just building what's legally allowed. There's really not an advantage to it at this point. It's not helping those neighborhoods build anymore because they can build a better house for the same price. And again, we have all that proof, and all it's really needs is training. So that's a big deal, and it'll help from the dollar amount of giving away things that aren't a benefit from a total tax abatement amount. So that's really the main item. And then as it goes up forward, my big piece is that yes, renovation should be incentivized higher than new construction. There is a higher cost most of the time, whether it should be or not, it's what it happens to get to those same levels.
So the next question is from Karen Robertson. And it is, if visitability is as popular as Paul says, why not reduce the 640,000 and 750,000 abatement caps?
I'm not sure I fully understand. On popularity, I'm meaning that it would be, we want it because it has a great value to citizens, right? So the average person moving in, being able to stay longer in a house, being able to live through that, and those houses having greater availability to everyone, and not a large chunk of the market being unavailable to some that need those accommodations in the house. Visibility is incredibly valuable for us as a community. Now, builders aren't building it. It's not happening, and renovation's even harder, quite frankly, to put visibility in an older home. So it's not happening. It needs an incentive. So the incentive should be there to be additional. So that's why I think, again, the way that you built this of adding $100,000 of extra cap, that's the equivalent of about $2,000 to $2,500 a year in tax savings if fully was realized per year for those years. That would cover the cost of adding visitability in most homes, and have the incentive to do that by itself. The extra years would not need to be there, like I said. But the 100,000 would absolutely cover that cost, and you'd see all of a sudden a lot of houses have that ability, be very much a more flexible space for those that need that flexible real estate community.
The next question is from Larry Falcon. He says, along with the quick citywide proposal, is the intention to also start working on the slower but popular approach that tiers neighborhoods?
As a co-chair, the simple answer is yes. And I think co-chair Gibbs would speak to that also, but the answer is yes, is to continue to work through tiers, making sure that legally, we're in the middle of a census. COVID-19 has pushed the census back. Off the top of my head, I don't even know the exact timeline of when the census has to be completed. But at the end of the day, those are the numbers that we want to use.
I think census is October, we pushed to October.
And if I could just add something, due to the virtual nature of this meeting and the software that I have on my computer, I'm unable to make kind of edits and notes in real time in front of you. So while what you're seeing on the screen right now is static, we are taking notes and we are going to circulate kind of the edits or the footnotes that have been discussed, kind of outlining that this proposal is kind of, the immediate approach, and that there are other kind of more long-term wishes or desires in the future. So while you don't see that in front of you right now, it will be circulated later. Are there any other questions or comments, Alex?
Yeah, so the next one is from Kitty's iPad. And the question is, does targeting neighborhoods introduce something similar to the past redlining practices as far as any discrimination concerns?
Is there anyone on the working group that could kind of speak to why doing targeting neighborhoods right now before a study would not be ideal, and why we would want to study?
So this is Caitlin with the law department. We would want to study, to Dan's point earlier, to help define what those criteria are, to determine what neighborhood goes into what bucket, in order to kind of create those tiers we've been talking about. So part of the issue that we're bumping into is, we haven't yet developed that criteria, and and we certainly don't want to replicate what happened with the redlining. And so I think a study would be valuable at ensuring that didn't happen.
Yeah, this is Mark. Thanks for that, Caitlin. In our discussion with our partner organization, the Home Builders and Paul Yankee, we specifically, the Cincinnati Area Board of Realtors, we do have a concern about that, specifically the, kind of reminiscent of redlining. So we are in agreement with that needs a lot more study before we would sign off on that particular point. So I just wanted to mention that. And also just wanted to piggyback earlier on what Paul said. Our two organizations, I believe the home builders would be right in line with us on this, but without a doubt, and I don't know if the recommendations are ranked in terms of priority or importance or what have you, but the more that we looked at the recommendations, we really wanted to draw attention to and champion really item number 12, and that is, minority or women-owned businesses that we wanted to move up in terms of its importance and its focus, because we are very serious about that. We truly believe in that, and just wanted to make that point.
Thanks, Mark. Alex, any other comments from the chat bar?
Yeah, two more so far. Brian Spittler is asking, where can we find the definition of how things like, he wrote visibility, but I think he meant visitability are defined. So where can they find those types of words defined?
This is Caitlin again. You can find those in the residential CRA policy ordinance, which as Dan indicated earlier, is ordinance number 276-2017. And Samantha, correct me if I'm mistaken, but I believe that ordinance is also on the property tax working group website. You can search for it on Council Online as well.
You're right, Caitlin. So on the property tax working group website, scroll to the bottom, there's a link to a resource page, and it should be under the tax abatement section. I will check after this meeting, and if it's not there, we will add a link just so it's easily accessible.
And before we move off this subject, and I don't know if we're gonna move on to the co-chair and to Samantha, I'm hoping that we can find a way to get as close to consensus on the numbers. I don't know if that's the working group taking a vote on this, but I'm hoping that we can leave today with not an abstract direction, but some consensus. All board members are not going to get everything that they want, and I know all of us understand that. But what would be so helpful for me is that we all work to get to a point on these numbers. I'm quiet because I want the group to come to that consensus. I'll have enough time to talk about this on the floor of council. And I would like to hear from all of you and then be your shepherd on the floor of council about what we came up with. And again, we're not going to all get everything that we want, but as close as we can. So that's what I'm hoping we can get. And I don't know how to tabulate consensus around. Paul is saying, hey, I want these changes. These are my recommendations. I sent those recommendations to you, Samantha, and to Dan. But let's not leave today without the board really saying, hey, I'm okay with this. I'm comfortable with this framework moving forward.
Absolutely. So what I'm going to suggest is when Alex is reading the last question that's left in the chat bar, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment and try to get both Paul's proposal and this proposal on a document that we can edit in real time. You'll just have to bear with me for a little bit while I do that. But Alex, in the meantime, do you want to read that last question?
Yeah, and the last one is not a question, it's a comment from Karen Robertson, and she just said the schedule for the census has been adjusted due to COVID-19. The revised deadline for final completion of the census is July 31st, 2021.
Thank you, Karen. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to pull those materials up for you. if there are any other comments or discussion, please feel free to have it when I'm organizing this. Or you can take this moment to get more coffee or whatever.
Samantha, while you're pulling that up, just as, again, I'll clarify that I kind of had this structure built in general, and we've already been working on, again, we have a HERS tax abatement, which is that moderate tax abatement. And again, I want to make sure this is clear that those were the original designs, those were about energy efficiency, kind of only being able to add the ability for people when they were doing an aesthetic rehab, like a small addition or doing a kitchen rehab or something like that, that they would also then reinvest in the things that would lower, right, energy bills for the house, you know, ongoing. And I think that, again, had a great amount of value if there was enough gap to incentivize it. But LEED wasn't, the way we had it built, it wasn't too far ahead of it. So if they were already going, it was a big rehab in an area where they could support that much money, LEED happened. Otherwise, it was hard to get to. I've been, again, we have a couple pilot programs already out in a couple other cities on the East Coast and actually some in the Midwest here, of a program that's a much, again, lower bar, it's more option oriented. That is what we're proposing, and it's pretty much built. I've got final details that I haven't put to the city yet, and I wanted to talk to them about that beforehand. But that is what we're proposing to get as a minimum level for rehabs, because we have seen, again, a major issue over the last 10 years. And this is what happens in any neighborhood, by the way. It has nothing to do with tax abatement. It has more to do with the fact that it's just areas of increasing value, people coming to the area to do more investment. It's one of the issues we kind of have with the property tax growth in some areas where you have the resident who stayed there is in a house that has high energy bills and high maintenance costs and bad air quality. And then neighbors, you know, driving up their property tax issues. In this particular case, even some of the new stuff in rehabs, Northside was a great example of this, that the first big batch of rehabs that were coming in were really pretty, but they weren't quality. And so you had a lot of outcomes that weren't what you really wanted out of it. This is to maintain that. So trust me when I say that, we're trying to create a bar in there to really promote quality rehab without putting the really high bar of LEED. Because I think that's what we've heard, and I think we all want. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. And I think I am ready to share screen. Can you all see my screen all right? I know it might be tiny, but if you want to give me a thumbs up that you can see it. Okay. Real quick, just before getting into this, Alex, any more comments or questions?
I don't see any additional ones right now.
Great. So in front of you, and I'm sorry, please, let me know if I should zoom in, just write a message to Alex and he'll let me know. But I'm going to try to zoom in as much as possible. On the left-hand side, or what's my left-hand side, I'm not sure if it's the same for you, but you'll see the citywide policy proposal that Carol and Dan presented. And then on the other side, you'll see the chart that Paul just sent me. Thanks for sending that over, Paul. So you can kind of see them compared. What we can do, I might have to zoom out for this, is we can start filling in a blank chart at the bottom, kind of taking what parts we want from each of these proposals. Does that sound like a good approach, working group members?
Yes.
Okay, so forgive me, I'm going to be writing in real time. If there are any spelling errors, that will be corrected afterwards. So if we want to start with, the first one, new construction. So citywide, or the proposal that was originally presented has a $200,000 cap, 10-year abatement term. Paul's proposal is, $0, 0 year term. Where do we want to land?
I'll give one other piece that's ahead of this, one of the other pushes for this, but if the, one of the issues with what we have on the citywide, when you get to the new construction, let's say, I mean, it's 400,000, let's say the tier 1 12-year, so the one that you guys put in. If one of the issues I have is what would happen from 400,000 and let's say 12 and then going to the 10, you'd have a pretty large reduction. Actually, I'm going to go back. It's actually more on the renovation. So on the renovation side, that 300,000 15-year, if that starts there with nothing extra, right now we have a huge increasing chunk of the renovation market being done better because of the changes we made in 2017, when the uneven nature of the abatement was 10 years, 15 years renovation the new, and now it's even. We're starting to see a magnitude of renovation actually come into much better quality renovation. Again, lead renovation is up probably 400% in the last 2 years. That's great. But what if we do that without that, what'll happen is that will drop off basically in half tomorrow, the moment that would go in. That's why kind of making it a more seasoned tier, and we can make a moderate level. That was kind of the part to this, and then also the tear down piece of it. I'm trying to make sure it doesn't, again, non-advantage to the city or to constituents. Don't want that to be, let's say, even for $200,000 or $250,000 houses. I don't want them to look at that and say, you know what, let's just go ahead and tear them down instead of doing the renovations.
So I have a question. So if my daughter, as an example, decides that she's going to, in my later years when I no longer cook or whatever, I don't know, and wants to build a tiny house in her backyard for her mother to live in, it has to be LEED or green in order for her to do that?
It would have to, so if you're going to claim a tax abatement on it, sure. So building code, right, is not a problem. But if we are going to build anything extra, one, if it's an accessory structure, it might be included in renovation, by the way. If it
No, I'm talking about building a tiny house. So
correct. Yeah. So if there are accessory structures that stay on the same plat, if it goes into a new plat or new parcel, then yes. And so in that case, you're making sure that it's something better than the bare minimum code, or at least it has a function of things that are going to be better than bare minimum code, which again should be on a tiny house. We've done multiple ones ourselves that again you can do for virtually no extra cost. It's about where you focus the energy and the time. So yeah.
I think you're missing the point. My point is a $200,000 new construction isn't going to be much. So is there a need to put that kind of restriction on that house, that building?
Oh, well, so I think of it this way. Remember, it's not a restriction. Code lets you build anything you want to build under the code.
Well, it's restriction to get an abatement.
Correct. Well, that's an incentive. So the incentive should be for something more than what is the minimum, right? And the minimum right now doesn't push very hard. We're about 10 years in arrears for the standard in energy code right now in Ohio. So what this would do is make sure that you would be more up to date with standard national building practices, and that you also do have some focus again on things that help the community. So you get to choose on some that lower tier one. Yeah, absolutely. Like there's just not an advantage not to. For example, Potter Hill that used to do these did it for $6,500 extra. Working in neighborhoods does it for $0 extra. So it's not extra cost. But what it is, it's lack of education by those builders who don't do that. They don't realize they can do it for same or virtually no extra cost, and have a better quality. They just haven't learned those practices. And that's one of the reasons why I say the adding of the education piece is critical. And we found that, especially with the smaller contractors, they're the only ones not doing it. Again, most of the building community is already building to these standards as a baseline now, but because of the incentive is the reason they learned. If they didn't have the incentive, they would not have learned that practice. And so that's a very big deal. Now they would try to revert some, but in this case, the small guys that you need to help, you've got to put a training program in to help that out.
And real quick, I'm hearing that there are 2 comments in the chat bar and 1 on YouTube.
Yeah, so one is from Larry Falcon in our chat bar. He says, I like prioritizing quality projects that minimize the long-term cost to owners. And I like the way Paul's proposal reflects the structure of LEED with silver, gold, and platinum tiers. In the committee's proposal, what is meant by green building tier 1 and tier 2?
So actually I think we will get to that, like when we are going through this chart. So I think we'll address those green building tiers and what that means compared to what Paul is proposing. So I'm gonna ask that question just be put in the parking lot real quick for now. And then what is the next comment?
The next one is from Laura Whitman, who's watching on YouTube. She emailed me and said, to Carol, her comment about renovations getting up to $750,000 in cost. Developers are tearing down houses to foundations and reusing that foundation to build new, bigger homes, but calling it a renovation. That gets you up to that $750,000 mark. That needs to be changed.
Thank you, Alex. So we were talking about new construction and where we want to land on the cap and the term.
And it looks like one more just now came in our chat bar from Karen Robertson. She said, looking at the current abatement chart, the dollar difference between new construction silver and gold is $162,000. The new chart is showing a difference of $200,000. Why are we increasing the dollar value of these abatements?
So thank you. I think we will get to that question as we move down the chart. So unless the working group, I was starting with new construction just because it was at the top. The working group, if you'd like to move around and jump down to that, the discussion about the green building tiers, I'm happy to do so. Please let me know how you want to proceed.
I think we should just proceed to what we're doing.
Okay, so we're on new construction without any quote unquote bells and whistles. Where do we feel, or what abatement cap do we want to land on in term?
I think if this helps frame anybody's thoughts, I think the biggest thing is, should we incentivize something that was already going to happen? Right, we've talked about that before. And if in new construction right now, to build code in those neighborhoods, we have an incredible supply demand curve issue that the supply that we need, right, demand is incredibly high. And in those neighborhoods even higher. So if we're going to get build at that level, should we be incentivizing something that was going to get built anyway? And since we know, and this is the part that's been out there, is that we know that we can build everything, especially in those neighborhoods, because of the way LEED and these other programs are going to be built. They are built in a way that makes it easier for affordable housing and smaller housing to be built affordably, right? And in this program, that automatic tier that's built into this helps equalize, because as I've talked about before, equity is a huge chunk of what LEED is built into their equation. So,
I missed Paul. What's those neighborhoods?
The neighborhoods that can support, let's say, the $150,000 to $200,000 houses, right, that are being built, new construction, 250. Because what will happen is if it goes over that, then the consumer will decide to go to a higher level because the abatement would be higher. So what you found is the market will decide based on these tiers which level they'll go to because of that dollar amount. That has been very efficient. So if these dollar amounts stay in this range, this is what they'll choose. So that you want to look at where a $200,000 house is being built of those neighborhoods, because there's just a few neighborhoods where new construction $200,000 houses are being built. Of those neighborhoods, right now, still well over half of them are going lead. Again, working in neighborhoods, when Power Hill was doing them, we've got a number of those that we can talk about. They were already doing lead. The ones that weren't, what we found is they were the lower quality contractors or the ones that weren't educated in some of these practices. They're either ones that really did have the higher amounts of either issues with fines on code violations or ones that weren't able to, just did not go through the education, didn't know where it was. And I think that resource is important, but they couldn't all find the one or two of us training it. And so that's the key.
Is there anything that mandates that we have to have LEED or green stipulations in every construction that we do in this city? Vice Mayor, is that something, because I don't know of anything. Dan, maybe you know the answer to that? Somebody?
It is part of the Green Cincinnati plan of something that has been a high priority for the city.
Priority, and what we're doing is mandating here. A priority is one thing, a mandate is something else.
This is not a mandate. This is an incentive. It's an incentive for something more than you were doing. This
Can
is
I
not,
bring
You could look at it as an incentive or punishment to somebody who doesn't want to do that. I mean, either way.
So Carol, this is Dan. It's been typically a policy goal of city councils over the years. Our other incentive programs, aside from the residential tax abatement, they do tend to favor lead construction because, our council members have typically had, green building as one of many of their policy goals. And incentives are one way to accomplish your policy goals.
And I would agree on the commercial side that that's really important. I'm just not sure I'm comfortable with it being on this side.
why is that, Carol?
Because it feels like we're mandating something that I'm not sure everybody wants to do or can. And I just, it was $275,000 for non-lead in the old policy, and we reduced that by 75% or $75,000, same term. I'm just asking the question if there's some, I understand that there's a goal for the commercial side, and I absolutely support that, but I'm just not sure I'm comfortable with this. I mean, if everybody else is, that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, can I bring up a question kind of / comment? This is Brian Spiller with the Mountain Lookout Community Council. And for me, it gets a little fuzzy in the sense that it does seem that there's multiple reasons for incentivizing development within the city via multiple mechanisms. But to me, it seems like all the focus of this so far is let's incentivize this development through tax abatements focused on green development. And I'm a little confused as to why this is the only discussion related to how we're handling this.
So Brian, thanks for your comment. In the future, could you please use the chat bar to submit public comment? Thank you. I don't know if anyone from the working group wants to address that or continue the conversation about new construction.
Yeah, again, I want to just bring up the green piece of it. Again, be careful of how we do this. This has to do with the high quality of construction. So what our issue is, Carol, and this is what we've seen, I have the data, HBA has the data, Mark has the data from the realtor side. What we've done, there has been an incentive to build lower quality housing in neighborhoods of lesser incomes. And that's not what we want. And it doesn't have to be. We have absolutely proven. So when you think of green, don't think of something you don't want to do. Think of quality, because that's the entire point. This isn't about just energy efficiency. It's about literally having a house that's more durable and it's inspected past the level of energy code. And again, nobody has to do it. This is an incentive. The city is giving an incentive and delaying the receipt of monies for something that's going to benefit them and the constituents. Something that comes in and is built at code level is not benefiting in anything greater than the minimum. Now, visitability, absolutely. Now you put an investment into that building that gives it more flexibility for more people and to stay in houses longer, which actually lowers cost. This is right along our world, right? Of looking at a legacy resident that can stay in their house longer. All of those match that. This, imagine again, a fixed income individual, now they have a house that has a lower expense ratio because of energy, water, their maintenance bills. These are all things that are absolutely happening in LEED houses that are not happening in code built houses. So that amount is a huge difference. And it affects lower income individuals by a magnitude of 4 to 10x. That's a big deal. We have those resources and we can give those again too, but it hurts the neighborhoods that are trying to build affordable first-time housing or affordable housing for seniors and other items the most. It doesn't hurt Hyde Park and Mount Lookout. It hurts these areas.
Are there any other committee members that have any opinion on this? I'd like to hear from somebody other than Paul and I.
Sure.
Daryl, this is Dan, and this isn't opinion so much as just telling you the data on the program. 80% of the abatements are non-LEED, have no green building component. Approximately, it's like 80, 83, somewhere in there. And then the remainder have a 7% are LEED silver, 6% are LEED gold, 3% are LEED platinum. So, even though this is a program that tries to give more benefit to green building, historically, most of the abatements that come through have no green building component.
So are you agreeing with me? We need to have at least one level where there's not a green component?
Well, he's talking about all abatements. So what's the percentage in new construction only, Dan?
I've been trying to get those data tables to merge, and I don't have that right now.
And there's a total number, and then if you looked at the first few years of the process versus now, I'd like to look at 18, 19, what current numbers are, and you should see a number of 85 to 90% is LEED. There are very few as a total house starts that are building in the city that aren't building LEED. And the only ones that are happening, if you look at the neighborhood by neighborhood, are happening in areas that don't support houses over $300,000. So we're basically forcing lower quality housing in lesser neighborhoods, and you don't have to. We've already proven that does not have to happen. I'll put Sister Barbara on the line and she'll talk about it for an hour. That's the important part, is that it's education. We've done an interesting experiment in Cincinnati and we have all the data. We don't have to live that way anymore. Columbus is still trying to figure it out, but we have it. So it's a big deal. We have a huge blessing in that way.
Yeah, and Carol, I would just submit, to answer your question. I mean, I echo what Paul has been sharing, and then recently Dan. The key would be to certainly look at the Cincinnati specific data within the city administration. We can try and put together some information too, but it is an incentive, and Dan talked about the 80% was non-LEED type of projects. From my recollection, a number of years ago, the reason for the additional abatement term for LEED properties was designed to incentivize people to make this reach for a LEED property, depending upon what certification level. It's not a mandate, without a doubt, but the idea was to incentivize to the fullest extent LEED certification in order to maximize those number of properties throughout the city. And that was an articulated policy by City Council a number of years ago when this was debated. So I don't know if that helps answer your question at all, Carol, or your concern, but it's definitely not a mandate. It's an incentive.
What's the cost difference in the construction to have any particular LEED certification?
That's the great question. So I'm using the example that we actually have, again, working neighborhoods to Potter Hill. Potter Hill charged $6,500 extra. on their houses that range from 140s to about 280. Working Neighbors doesn't charge any extra. They'll tell you their additional cost will never exceed 10,000. So those are builders that have figured it out. I've definitely had builders that started it and built their first, $190,000 house, 180, and it cost them 20 in upgrades because their contractors didn't know what they were doing. We had to teach them. Once you taught them, those numbers always came between around 5 to 10,000 extra. And a number of them in the process can actually save $5,000 to $10,000 by savings because of the inspections that happen during the process. So there can be a net zero cost. But you figure is about the range of energy savings and water savings by itself pays for the mortgage difference. We have actually an example of that. Working in Neighborhoods cost difference, if you added the extra 10,000 even, which they say there isn't any, that's about $40 a month on your mortgage. You should save right around $40 to $45 in energy and water costs by itself, let alone a higher maintenance building, a more comfortable building, and a healthier building. So really as a net cost, even of the loan, it comes out to be zero, even our worst case scenarios. It's not that way when you get up to middle income and higher income houses, right? It's more expensive. But in the lower tiers, it's the easiest math there is.
Any other thoughts from working group members? Okay.
The key, Samantha, so that you're not, again, driving this, and I certainly appreciate your lead, so we can move off of this point. If there's not the consensus to go with Paul's recommendation, then we keep it as it is and move forward. And so we need to hear from the working group to try to get consensus. I certainly can make the call, but don't want to do that because ethically, my power will be when the document gets to the floor of council. What I'm hoping is, and I have never said this, is that we can get to a consensus that the working group respects the process so that we then don't splinter when we go to council to try to ultimately get what we wanted here in the discussion. And so, I'm laying back, but want to facilitate a decision. Paul has put forth a recommendation, co-chair. I'm not laying this at your feet. If you don't agree with it, if there's any other member that doesn't agree, and those who do agree, if Mark Query, for example, I just know Mark will, if he agrees with it, let's just hear like where people are so that we can hit this point and move off. I do have a hard stop at 11. So we've spent, this is an important discussion, but let's just see if we can move away from it. If we can't come to a consensus, right, there's no way city council is going to come to a consensus.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And with that, the virtual scenario that we're in kind of makes it hard for me to see everyone's faces and, body language. So I think, with that direction, I'm just going to kind of read off each working group member's name. And at that point, can you just make a statement? We're going to say the original proposal from Carol and Dan is option A. Paul's suggestion is option B. And of course, if you do not want to make a decision, you can just say, I kind of abstain. We'll move forward with that. So first, Chris Offrey. Which proposal do you feel comfortable with?
You need to unmute yourself.
You know what? He might have left the call. It looks like he's no longer on the call. Carol Gibbs. We,
I like the no change, but I am also willing to go with the group.
okay. Elizabeth Bartley.
I am good with the first proposal. I think that right now to move towards supporting Paul's just would need, there's too much conversation going for me to be going, yeah, okay, I'm moving in that direction. So I'm going to stick with the first proposal.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Is Mark Lawson on the call or Sharon Watkins? Okay, I don't see them on the call anymore. Mark Quarry?
Yeah, I would support Paul's modification, so option B.
Okay, thank you. Mike Wagner?
Yeah, I support Paul's changes. I think it makes sense from what I'm looking at compared to what we originally proposed.
Okay, and Paul Yankee?
Can be, sure.
Okay, and then I'm Eve Bolton. She may be not on the call. I am looking through the list, but if you are a member of the working group and I have not called your name, oh, Eve, I see you on the call.
Yeah, sorry, I had to step out for another call. Yes.
So we have two options before us. We have the option that Carol and Dan presented in the beginning of the meeting, and then we have the second proposal from Paul. Which option do you feel comfortable with? They're on your screen right now.
Carol and Dan's.
So Samantha just called me and her computer just went down temporarily. She's in the process of getting it back up, and just hang tight so she can get that spreadsheet back up and going.
So Alex, while we're waiting on her, I think just something, even though DCD again, the administration has not weighed in, but on either of these proposals, but just something like, I suppose, for the general betterment of the group, what we have seen historically is like for whatever your policy objectives you're trying to accomplish, the increase for each, let's just call it the increasing abatement. So as you kind of walk down a chart, you need to make, if a policy objective costs more, is more difficult, you just need to put more of a delta between your different types of abatements. And so like whichever proposal you're going with, so like if you look at Paul's just as an example, it incentivizes people because you don't provide an incentive for new construction unless it's green. In theory, it incentivizes more green construction when you're building new, while not penalizing you if you're renovating. That's kind of the way, like when you're thinking through like what you might recommend, the cap of that abated value is really the lever that you pull to try to get more of your policy outcomes, whether your policy outcomes are encouraging renovations, whether your policy outcomes is a particular type of construction. That's just what we've learned in implementing the program and seeing people not choose, visitable construction or HERS because, the benefit of the current program for those two types was only additional years. It's really the abatement cap that was the, incentive that persons were most interested in. So, and really like, just again, 80% of the abatements that go through the program are not, LEED silver and above. Just, I can't tell you whether it's not feasible or whether it's just because because the delta is not that much between getting your base level abatement and going for a higher level of green building. So for what that's worth.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
That actually does bring up that gap between the new construction and the renovation, especially if we introduce the moderate level. So it's even easier, much easier than LEED. That actually is also going to help severely slow down the tear downs to build cheap housing, right? So a tear down of an old building or old units. I was thinking a lot about Auburn, actually, some of those houses that can be done the right way instead of tearing those down and doing new. So my former neighborhood. So yeah, I would, that's another thing. I made that delta big for that reason too. It's another advantage.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Samantha. My biggest fear hosting a virtual meeting happened. My computer died. So thank you for bearing with me. I'm glad that the conversation continued, and it seems like we were able to continue live streaming. So I'm happy to hear that. Since I did miss some conversation, I just want to let you know, after we did kind of a tally of where people were landing, it was a split. It was 3-3 without the vice mayor weighing in. I'm not sure if you came to a consensus when I was gone or not. Okay, so I mean, I believe is it Robert's Rules of Order that says that if a motion or a proposal does not receive the majority, then it doesn't pass. So with that, it seems like we're leaning towards keeping the new construction abatement cap at $200,000 with a 10-year abatement term.
Well, I think normally Robert's rules, the tiebreaker would go to the chair, or in this case, co-chairs.
And I've not to either way, but if you wanted to push that to after, because it will be affected by the next two categories. Just as bringing up, if it doesn't bring up enough gap, it may create that it might be a reason to go one direction or another.
Great. I'm just going to put in the existing proposal highlighted as a reminder to come back to it. We do have 14 minutes remaining, so we will move on to renovation and restoration. So the current proposal is an abatement cap of $300,000, 15-year abatement term. And the proposal is a $150,000 abatement cap with an abatement term of 10 years. Where do we feel comfortable?
Samantha?
The renovation restoration is 300,000 and 15-year.
Oh, I'm sorry if I misspoke.
Samantha, did Eve vote?
For the new construction, she did, and she remained with the citywide, the original proposal.
That's fine, thank you.
So is there any discussion about where we want to land? I hate to boil everything down to a vote. If there's some good discussion or questions to be had with, the renovation and restoration proposal.
I'll just bring up that the thought process on mine is to do two things. One, standard renovation, restoration of any kind. Remember, as Dan was bringing up, the 80%, most of our rehabs, as far as the quantity, are not full rehabs, right? They're partial rehabs, they're part work. That's the numbers he's trying to get to, but the vast majority is pulling a $20,000 rehab and a $40,000 and a $50,000 and a $60,000. There's a much smaller number of $200,000 rehabs and 300. That's a much smaller number. So
our point on this, if you remember the discussion, was to really, which is why I'm proposing we call it restoration, renovation, is to try and incentivize, for your word, to keep old homes and not tear them down. So you're correct. If you're going to redo the kitchen as a renovation, it might be $20,000. If we're doing restoration of historic or old homes, it's not going to be $20,000.
Correct. And actually, again, I do a lot of historic rehab and work with historic tax credits in the state and the federal. And again, an issue that we're having a lot of is the bigger ones that are happening are not taking into consideration a lot of things that will actually maintain the building long-term. That's why the state and federal organizations of historic are actually putting in a lot of quality items that are actually part of what we're talking about here. So just making sure ventilation actually happens to this, because they're making small changes to not the others, and they have unintended consequences of tearing the brick up and things like that. So
Well, and here in Hamilton County and Cincinnati, Ohio, we have to be very careful around rehabbing and restoration and lead paint and lead drifting and blowing across neighborhoods and harming small children.
that's right, which is all extra cost, to your point.
Correct.
Yeah. So I'm huge advantage. Just make sure that, I mean, the renovation has to be high. And that's, I think, you know, we had 300,000. I think it went to 15-year. I completely agree. Basically, I just want a minimum standard that they are. If they're putting that much, $200,000 or $300,000 in, they can address indoor air quality. They can address a couple things, bare minimum, and not just make it aesthetic. That's really where the only reason I split that between a base renovation with no means to worrying about quality of the building. You're just worried about quality of, you're just worried about aesthetic or whatever other items. The other one, though, unfortunately, is much more about living in the building. So that's the reason we split that up in our recommendation.
So I think we're leaving that the way it is.
At $300,000 for a 15-year abatement.
Or yeah, I just propose that there's, again, some level of performance measurement on it to prevent against some of the issues we're having, again, with the lower quality stuff in the neighborhoods that can't afford it, quite frankly. And it hurts our historic as well. So, but a standard renovation, which again is just doing a code renovation of any kind, I think that's great to still put it there, but the vast majority of those are not over 150,000. So just lowering that dollar amount, I think, is the key. So kind of having those two tiers. And that's been brought up. I know a couple of council members and whatnot I've talked to over in the years have brought this up. This is something they wanted to put on the docket at a change. We didn't get it in 2017. I think it matches a lot of our goals of this group. And that's why I wanted to make sure it got brought up according to their voices.
So am I understanding correctly that we would have a renovation, restoration, not at 300,000, and then that would go up with, green building or other kind of bells and whistles? Or I'm a little confused about where we're landing on this.
Yeah. So yeah, my recommendation is just any renovation. Right now, the current renovation policy is if you do anything over $5,000 in the city, up to anything, you can go up to $275,000 of abatement for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Qualification on it. So what you're getting is people putting in $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 into renovation and making it real pretty, but they're not doing much to the quality of the house. And we're having issues with that. So I think of those higher dollar amount renovations, they need to be held to some standard. And Carol, I'd actually love to even put, if there's a historic designation, right? Or anything else, because that is a cost justification. I think you could put that in there. So I think there's something, but you've got to put a bar at those larger dollar amount renovations. Still making the small dollar renovations, though, the city, that's a very good advantage. You want people to do updates of their house constantly, and you want it to be permitted work. Otherwise, people will do unpermitted work, which gets us all in all kinds of problems. So I think the tiers is something that has been brought up before, but this would be a good spot to do that. So again, I agree with 300, but I think there should be some barrier to quality there. And then you can have a lower tier just for any renovation whatsoever to make sure you capture the more, that's the majority of the small renovations that are happening, not restorations.
I'm going to put that note in. It is 10:53, and we have quite a bit to work through, which is why we planned a second meeting on Monday, July 13th. I think, just so we're not ending this meeting mid-thought, I think we might need to pause here and regroup on Monday, July 13th. It's from 2:30 to 4:30. What we will do in the meantime is send these charts out to the working group and members of the public. It'll be on our webpage so that you can kind of look at it. And certainly if there are questions or comments that that you're going to have on Monday, if you want to send them, or any data or studies or whatever that you want to share, if you want to send them to me, in advance if possible, so we can make sure that it all gets brought up and that the co-chairs are aware. Excuse me. At this point, and I'm sorry to cut this short, I felt like we just got going, but working group members, any questions or concerns at this moment?
I am begging members to please weigh in on these two slots, because I don't want to be, I don't want it to be between Paul and I. I think it needs to be more of a consensus. So I'm okay either way, but I would love to hear from other people. So if they could please weigh in, if it's, they didn't want to weigh in during this meeting, that's fine. Weigh in with Samantha after the meeting, please.
Yes, and I think that's why we will send this to the entire working group. It's I think there's 6 of you guys on the call right now, but this is a larger conversation. So any way that we can all communicate would be great. Alex, any last messages in the chat bar?
So Elizabeth Bartley had to leave at maybe 10:40, 10:45. And then 2 others, Elizabeth Brown just said caps over $500,000 lead to public concerns of fairness in the tax system, with wealthy people getting abatements and middle-class people having to pay property taxes. Won't that affect the political acceptance of the recommendations? And then Larry Falcon said, since it was a 3-to-3 split, is there any middle ground, maybe $100,000 for new construction at minimum code compliance? And that's it for comments in the Zoom group chat.
Thank you, Alex. On that note, thank you to everyone for bearing with this virtual meeting. I welcome any comments, so please feel free to send them to me. My email address is on the website. If you did have any concerns about the technology or anything like that. If not, I will see you all on Monday, July 13th from 2:30 to 4:30.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, Samantha. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Vice Mayor.
Bye.
Thanks, Samantha.